Coming up on Total Access, the locker room.
Part of why you can be productive in football is you got the tape, and the eye in the sky doesn't lie.
Yeah.
We're all going to be very honest about what we're seeing on that film. But in terms of genuine legislating, I have found that the less you're speaking, probably the more productive you are.
Well, that rules me out, Mike.
Welcome to NFL Total Access, the locker room. I'm Michael Robinson alongside Super Bowl winning head coach Brian Billick. Coach, what's happening, man?
Hey, got a really special one this week, don't we?
A real special one, guys. We're here to let you guys in on what players and coaches really talk about inside the locker room. Today, we're taking things out of the locker room and into the halls of Congress with former Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Anthony Gonzalez, a former Big Ten player. And on this episode, you're going to hear a real story and experience from the events that happened January 6th, on our Capitol. What an amazing story. What an amazing person, Coach.
Yeah, and underlies just how great an impact NFL players can be. This guy takes it from the field to a career beyond, and that sense of community and commitment. It's going to be fabulous for everybody to hear his story.
I think everybody who leaves the NFL struggles at some point for some period of time with kind of reestablishing their identity and understanding who they are and what they're going to do.
Anthony Gonzalez, touchdown from Peyton Manning.
I was kind of tired of sitting on my couch and complaining all day. And so in 2017, I decided to run for Congress. My favorite part of the NFL was the camaraderie. Politics by its nature is divisive. My goal is to bring some of what I learned from the team sports directly into the political realm.
We got a good one today, all right? Yeah. Representing Ohio's 16th district in the U.S. House of Representatives, okay? Let's just go ahead and call his name. Anthony Gonzalez, Big Ten, of course, Ohio State,
sure. All
of that. Welcome to the show, Congressman. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Good to be with y'all.
Yeah. Absolutely. So look, Congressman, I again, like we said before, I know you got constituents, but we start every show, all right, with a locker room story. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be in the locker room, but, behind the scenes, something that everybody doesn't get a chance to hear. Let's hear yours.
Well, we'll start with, we weren't a big hazing team in our squad. Tony Dungy always had a thing, hey, if you're a rookie, we expect you to play. We're not going to haze you. You're going to come in and contribute right away. But there was one coach that we hazed a little bit, and I won't put him out there, but we had somebody come from the college ranks. As you know, the culture in college is from the culture in the NFL, and he didn't quite get that necessarily. And so one night we may have taken his keys and moved his car to the yard line and filled it with packing peanuts. So
what?
He woke up that morning, couldn't find his car. And
you notice he said we may have. See,
we may have. There you go.
The Congress we maybe might have done that.
There may have been some collusion with the equipment and in the locker room staff to get those keys, but it's all in good fun. Message delivered, and it ended up being just fine. But we had to get our quick licks in there.
Oh, there it is, man. So look, I'm gonna get right into it because really, you're probably gonna be one of my favorite guests because I get asked a lot about being, in the political arena and all of those types of things. So to have a football player here who's gone without, been through the football side of things and then been able to explain and talk to people and get voted into leadership, that's a big deal. So if you can kind of take a thumbnail sketch of like how you went from playing on the Gridiron, right? Ohio State, going to the Indianapolis Colts and then ending up being elected and a representative of Congress.
Yeah. So, my life, I'd always wanted to serve. So my family's background, briefly, my father immigrated here from Cuba. They had to escape the Castro regime when Castro took over. And my mother's father was a World War II veteran. And so, we've always just been one of those families where politics is very important in our house and our gratitude for the country is sort of front and center. And my grandmother always said, my father's mother, the Cuban one, always said, look, if you see things happening in your country that are giving you problems, that are concerning to you, and you feel like you're not quite sure where things are headed, then you have an obligation to get involved. And that doesn't mean that you run for Congress necessarily or that you run for public office. But you have to get involved, because in her words, which she says, I lost my country, and you can't let that happen here. And so, those things were always in my head. And then after the NFL, I went off to business school, and my plan was to work in the business world for a long time. I got my MBA at Stanford and was in the technology sector and loved it. I was having a lot of fun. But I truly felt a calling sort of at the end of 2016, 2017, where you just saw all this division happening in the country. And it stopped making sense in a lot of ways. It didn't feel like the country that I grew up in. It didn't feel like the state that I grew up in, and in many ways. And so I felt like, now when things are as chaotic as they've ever been, it's time to get involved. It ended up being maybe more chaotic than I thought. But I'm as proud of this as anything I've ever done. And I thank God every day for the opportunity to represent my district, because it's great work. It's the best work I've ever been able to do. And we got a lot of work to do. So that's how I got here.
Mike and I always talk about how interesting an NFL or college locker room, but particularly an NFL locker room, is probably as diverse a work environment as anybody can come into. There is such a cross section of political, geographic, racial background, religious, economic, across the board. And yet you make it all come together, and you become a team. And you've seen coming into Congress and dealing with obviously a tremendous amount of diversity, it had to kind of feel like, okay, I've been here before, I know how to do this, but then it takes it to a whole nother level.
Yeah. So what you just described is what I always say is my favorite part of the NFL and college, right? Is you get people from every background you can think of, and we all come together and build the tightest bonds that you'll have in a professional environment. And you go to achieve something special and lasting. And it's incredible. And part of why I wanted to get into this, I thought, look, I've had different perspectives, and we're a divided country, and certainly a divided Congress. But I think I can take that NFL experience and those locker room experiences and find ways to work productively with people, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't really matter to me. If somebody is willing to have a sincere dialogue about an issue that's going to make our country better, I think I can do it. That was part of my goal and part of sort of why I thought I could do this job. And so far we've had success. I didn't necessarily set out to do this, but last Congress passed more bills than any freshman Republican in Congress. Yeah. And like I said, I didn't necessarily have that as a goal, but we ended up doing it. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, I come to it with a mindset of trying to be productive and collaborative and not divisive and, throwing rhetorical bombs every 2 seconds, which a lot of people probably do, unfortunately.
Yeah, Anthony, but how do you cut through? Because again, what kind of I hesitate with getting into politics is, to me, 2 + 2 is 4. That's a fact. It's common sense. Let's move on. You know what I mean? How do you cut through all the political BS, right? Because some things, at least to the outside world, look like common sense, right? And I know that, you compared it, and we all are comparing it to a locker room. And in a locker room, I think the reason why we all bring it together is because there's one said goal. Regardless of what you believe in, we all know the goal. How do you make sure that everybody has the same goal so we can work together? How do you do that?
Well, it's hard. I'll tell you this, it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. But, here's another beauty of football, and I've used this in my whole life. Part of why you can be productive in football is you got the tape, and the eye in the sky doesn't lie. And, we're all going to be very honest about what we're seeing on that film.
Damn, I didn't think about that.
Make our corrections and go forward. Mm-hmm. And in Congress, people just create their own realities, and they create their own narrative. Mm-hmm. And nobody even agrees on a shared set of facts and goals. And so that can be unbelievably frustrating and difficult. What I have sort of set my path on is, look, there are a lot of people here that just make a lot of noise. And they're the ones that you see on TV, and they're the ones you see on Twitter. And they do a good job of building their brand. Very few of them legislate at all. If you look at the bills that get signed into law, they don't have their names on them. And so in my head, I said, I want to be a workhorse, not a show horse. And so I kind of put my blinders on and just say, what are the issues that are important to my district and who's willing to work with me on them? And then we go forward that way. And, occasionally you have to step up and speak out when things go really off the rails. But in terms of genuine legislating, I have found that the less you're speaking, probably the more productive you are.
Well, that rules me out, Mike. I can tell you right now, I'm not running for it. I had a great honor a number of years ago when I was still coaching. I went into Congress, and the league was doing some initiatives in terms of youth activity and fitness. And I got to meet Tom Osborne, who, of course, was a legend to me growing up as a young coach and in Nebraska and everything. And he actually ended up in Congress as well. And we were a little function afterwards, and I always remembered it. And I didn't know Coach Osborne. But, obviously being coaches, you kind of, gravitate towards one another. I must have caught him on a bad day because he just started lamenting about, he said, Coach, I come from a world where you have an objective and you set out the parameters and you go do it. He says, here, all we do is talk around and around and around something, and we never get anything done. How do you push your constituent or your coworkers past that?
Well, he's absolutely right about some issues, right? There are some issues that are so partisan and so toxic that, it's easy to lose hope that you're going to find a real compromise position that, that people can come to. So he's right on that. Where I try to play is, okay, look, I join a bunch of caucuses that are bipartisan in nature. So I'm in something called the Problem Solvers Caucus. I think it's 28 Republicans, 28 Democrats now. We meet once a week. It's not something anybody's, spent a whole lot of time researching, but that's sincere dialogue where we come with our issues and we say, hey, look, I got a workforce issue in my district. Is it going to make the front page of the Wall Street Journal? Probably not. But it's really important to my district, and it's important to districts, all over the Midwest. And so you build relationships and find commonality there. And then you have to use what leverage you have and what tools you have, to influence the ultimate outcome. And again, it's hard, right? I passed, I think it was 11 bills last cycle. I would have liked to pass 111, but you can only really get certain things done. And if you're focused on the result, I think you can get there, but you really do have to pick and choose, unfortunately.
Anthony, I got to ask you this, man. I know we're going to get to football, but this is interesting to me, man. And I love having you on the show. And actually, I look up to you, man, because you actually followed, your conscience and did something about a problem. You made a pretty unpopular decision with your new team, right? The Republican Party, when you voted to impeach the president. Like, take us through that process in your mind, man. Were you scared? I mean, I'm sure I live here too, so I know there were threats and things like that. Just what about your time in football helped you, follow your conscience and make that decision?
Well, look, I think that, whether you agree or not with the vote, fine. But in my opinion, you have to be willing to lose your job in this job. And I'm not saying that's my fate. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it's not. But, I've taken 2 oaths in my life. I took an oath to my wife, and I've taken an oath to the Constitution. I take those very seriously, and I plan to honor both of them. And so, on that day, I didn't want to make that vote because I knew what the political ramifications were. But when I looked at the totality of what took place on January 6th, and I looked at my oath to the Constitution, and I thought of the long-term health of the country, right? The long-term health of the country. Yeah, it's going to be painful for the next, 2 years. But when I'm sitting down with my kids, my son's 2 now, my daughter's almost 1. When I'm sitting down with them 15, 20 years from now, I am 100% confident that I'm going to be able to look them in the eye and tell them I did the right thing. Because I think that ultimately, the violation from the president, unfortunately, was so grievous that it required that vote. And again, people can disagree with that, and that's fine. We can have that debate. But where I came down was the conduct was impeachable, and I think we need to send a message to all Americans and to all future presidents that if anything like that ever happens, that there will be consequences.
I'm fat, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds and too political with it, but it's something very topical right now. And I always wonder how members of Congress like yourself, when you have the COVID bill that's coming up, that clearly there's a need in the country, but it's now saddled with so many other things that have nothing to do with our immediate. We talk about that immediate objective. Let's win this week. Here's what we do. How do you, because you just talked about, you have this grave responsibility to service those that are in need, but it's also saddled with things, a number of which, and I'm just assuming in some of the cases that you're going, geez, this isn't right. How as a member of Congress do you bifurcate those two things?
That's the political stuff.
Do the good thing versus the bad stuff and not negate the other.
Yeah, man.
That's the stuff that drives you crazy, right? I mean, just being honest, because you're going, I have worked on bipartisan COVID bills for the last year and have passed and have been influential in passing. The last COVID deal was dead until the Problem Solvers Caucus that I described. We came out in September, and the sides weren't even talking. We came out in September and said, here's an agreement. The 50 of us just came up with it. So
go around this.
Yeah, work around this. And it ultimately got passed into law. And we had a history of doing that the whole way, where we were willing to work in that fashion. In the new Congress, there's just no appetite for it, for bipartisanship right now. And I hope that eventually we'll get there, but right now there isn't. And so that's frustrating, obviously. But in terms of how do you weigh the bill, again, you got to just ask yourself. At least this is how I'm processing it. When I look at everything that's in there, do I think it's ultimately going to make us better off or worse off? And if it's better off, then I'd support it. And if I think it's going to make us worse off in the long run, then I won't. In this particular instance, I think there's too much in it, and I think we have real financial risks with how much stimulus is being pumped into the economy. Not to get too technical on that, but that's my personal. Right. So I won't be supporting it. But again, the frustrating bit, to be frank, it's not does it pass or not. It's how are we working? And are we working in a way where we want to find common ground and solve the problem together? And to your point, I mean, I think any objective observer would say in this case, the answer is no.
Anthony, you mentioned it a little earlier, January 6th. Take us through your experience, man. I don't want to make you relive anything crazy, but, I saw that the images of it on the news. I mean, that's something I read about in the textbooks in elementary school, man. I just never thought that something like that would happen here. You know what I mean? Just take us through your experience.
Well, it was a sad day, right? It was a heartbreaking day for the country. And like I said, I got into this sort of with my grandmother's counsel in my ear, which is if you ever see the country going in a direction you don't want it to, you have to step up and you have to do something. January 6th, the build up to January 6th was disappointing, incredibly disappointing. I thought it was highly irresponsible from the president, highly irresponsible from a lot of members of Congress. And then the events, which in hindsight, I don't think anybody saw it coming, but you look back and you say, maybe it is predictable when you behave that way for 2 months after an election. And so, for me, it was very sad, like it was for most people, but it was also scary in a lot of ways. I was on the House floor. I was walking back to my office when the folks came in, and we barricaded in my office, barricaded the door. I put my running shoes on and changed in case I had to make a run for it. And I wrote a note to my wife and kids in case, you just don't know what's going to happen. Put it in my desk, and I just said, look, no matter what happens, I want the last word here. And so, we kept each other informed throughout the day. But they were tense moments, and, it was hours, 5 hours, 6 hours before things got back under control. So the good news, though, in that sense, it was a very sad and difficult day for the country, and we need to reconcile that. But the good news is American democracy won the day at the end of it. At the end of it, American democracy won. They didn't stop the process. The process went on. We did our work, and a transition happened. Not the way that any of us would want, and we hope to never see it again. But it did happen. And so, when I get people reaching out from other countries, frankly, who are friends of mine saying, it was tragic and it's going to hurt the U.S., abroad for that to have happened. but it still sends a strong signal that nothing can stop American democracy. And I think that's something that, in a weird way, we should be proud of, despite how horrific the events were.
Well, we're proud of the way you dealt with it all. And we don't, with this a podcast, we try to be a little more upbeat. So I'm going to take a personal look. We're going to go back to the Ohio's, and the guys know that you knew my daughter at Ohio State, and you guys went out for a little bit. I got to know personally, at some point, didn't the fact that you were dating a coach's daughter just scare the shit out of you a little bit? Just a little bit?
I was worried it was going to hurt my draft stock, so yeah, you just never know. Wow. It's so fun. Yeah, I don't. I'll leave it at that. You're just worried about your draft position. You're going, hey, long term, it's going to be best for everybody if we don't, go down this path. So
great answer.
Well, great answer. He's a politician through and through.
He politicked that one, Coach. He politicked that one. But look, I got to ask, a football question before we get you out of here. I know your time is valuable. One of your old quarterback, Peyton Manning, Hall of Fame inductee. I mean, just talk about it. I don't want to brag, but, we beat him in the Super Bowl when I was with Seattle. But he ended up going back a few years later and winning it with another team. So it was all good. But just talk about your experience with him and how happy you were to see him get recognized as one of the greats.
Oh, thrilled for him and his family. I mean, who's more deserving than Peyton Manning? Right. Everybody knew he was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he wouldn't, he wasn't taking it for granted. And he did call a bunch of us. I got a phone call, he said, I just want to thank you for being part of the journey. And I'm thinking, you don't have to thank me for anything. I was barely a part of the journey, but certainly excited for him. And like I said, I look forward to celebrating with him and his family because he deserves it. He's an incredible football player. He's an even better friend and a loyal friend. And so just thrilled for him. When I had the opportunity, when I was doing game for Fox and did a game with Peyton and got to watch practice, and I'm interested in your perspective. I've never seen an NFL practice like that where the quarterback kind of ran the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, with the offensive line and where everybody, that was amazing to see to me. Yeah, and it went beyond that, right? So like things you didn't see, if the scoreboard operator played music too loud on third down.
You lying, man. Are you kidding me?
On Monday, hey, get him down here. Somebody needs to bring him down here. Hey, it's third down. I need this thing quiet. You can't be playing those.
Are you kidding me?
Every single detail he was going to be a part of, including, who was getting treatment and when. I mean, I've never met anybody, and I've met a lot of successful people in my life. I've never met anybody who is that good at what he does as Peyton Manning is at the game of football with respect to the details and how much knowledge he has on it. Because he understands the game of football at a level that I've never seen before. Yeah. And it was so fun to be a part of because every day you just learn so much.
Well, that's why they call him the general. Representative Gonzalez, Anthony, thank you so much for being a part of our podcast, man. This is a tremendous experience. Good luck in your future endeavors, man. I know you're gonna continue to serve us, doing a great job. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Total Access to Locker Room. For more insight with a locker room point of view, check out the latest episodes every Wednesday and Friday on Apple and Spotify.